Dave, you know if you were supposed to be running this meeting, right?
I would know.
She's never late, so.
I'm reaching out to Councilor Grossman right now.
Lenny, you going to spring training?
I have tickets for one game for St. Patty's Day. They actually won them in a raffle, so I'm going then.
Lenny, you need to be here for St. Patrick's Day. We've discussed this.
I told you I was not looking favorable.
Well, whoever gave you those tickets, I'd like to have a word with them.
It's the first thing I've wanted in a long time.
Hi, everybody.
Hello.
All right, the boss is here. Everybody hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Why can I not hear you? All right, hold on. Okay, that should be better. Somebody say something. Okay, yes, I can hear you. Very good. All right. Good evening, everybody. This is a regularly scheduled meeting of the Finance Committee. At the beginning of the meeting, I am joined by, I'm just going to go around the screen because I don't have the list up. Councillor Gentile from Ward 4, Councillor Humphrey from Ward 5, Councillor Noel from Ward 6, Councillor Oliver from Ward 1, Councillor Norton from Ward 2, Councillor Malachy from Ward 3, Councillor Kalis, Vice Chair of the Committee from Ward 8, as well as my colleague Councillor Laredo from Ward 7. We have one item before us tonight, 31-23, which is Councillors Gentile, Laredo, Malachy, and Ryan requesting a discussion regarding delinquent property tax policy and procedure, specifically a discussion with the city treasurer regarding current policies and procedures designed to collect delinquent property tax payments, to further discuss possible new policies and procedures to help collect these delinquent accounts. So I see that we're obviously joined by our treasurer, Mr. Mendez. We're joined by Commissioner Lojek. I think that I should probably turn this over to the docketers first, just to introduce what it is that they're hoping to accomplish tonight, and then turn it over to at the docketer's discretion. Oh, Ms. Lemieux, I see you want to say something, so I'll recognize you in a second. To Mr. Mendez, Commissioner Lojek, if you guys want to respond, and we'll take it from there. Ms. Lemieux, did you want to say something before I turn it over?
No, thank you. Please turn it over to the docketers first, if you would.
Okay. Councillor Gentile, can I start with you and turn it over to you to introduce this and however you'd like to organize the discussion?
Be happy to. As far as at least what I'm personally trying to accomplish tonight, I'm just looking for information. I don't anticipate having any suggestions about policies, ordinances, or whatever. I just wanted to get updated on how we're handling delinquent property taxes. I think we're all familiar with the situation on Newtonville Ave and how the property delinquency grew to over $600,000. So that kind of prompted my thinking on this. But I also wanted to, better understand what goes on with other properties. And then maybe at some point in the future, propose some ideas or, for a new ordinance or whatever, but I needed to get information. I think we all do. The only other thing I'll say is that as a finance committee, I think we all agree that one of our most important jobs is to protect the financial interests of the city. And certainly collecting of all property taxes owed is a vital part of that, which is why I think it's really important, as I know you will, that we take it seriously. So what I wanted to do is just start by asking our treasurer, Mr. Mendez, if there are any state laws or state guidance or city ordinances or city policies that dictate exactly when we put a lien on a property because they're in arrears, when we're supposed to take any kind of definitive actions. I don't think that there's any law that tells you when you're supposed to, initiate foreclosure proceedings. But I guess I'd just like to know how we go about taking action, how much of it is mandated, how much of it is policies. And I thought that that might be a good starting point.
Ms. Lemieux, I see you're moving. Did you want to chime in there before Mr. Mendez
if I could,
answers?
I just wanted to, if any of the other docketers want to speak, please recognize them first, but I want to be able to kind of set the stage for the conversation. We're looking forward to the dialogue with you this evening. It is an important conversation for all of us to have, and we have lots of good information for you. So I just want to set the stage when it's appropriate. I don't know if any of the other docketers wanted to make a comment.
Let's ask Councillor Laredo and Maliki. Did you want to say something?
Briefly, I mean, I'm here because I fully support what Councillor Gentile has docketed. I think it's important for the council in general, and particular finance committee to be on top of it. And frankly, want to understand why, when there's substantial monies owed, we're not taking legal action to collect. But I expect that'll all be part of Ms. Lemieux's presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Maliki. You just need to unmute, Councillor Maliki.
I'm sorry. Yes, yes, same concerns that Councillors Gentile and Laredo just stated, and hoping to get an update on sort of where we stand on delinquent taxes and the tax title lists. I know I asked Treasurer Mendez about this back in September 2021 when he was relatively new, and he had a big backlog of things to deal with, including, I think it was 50 something on the tax title list, and 658 addresses on some type of taxes owed, probably more on the short duration, but some also, multiple years. And I'm sort of interested in learning more about what triggers something getting from the multi-year delinquent status to tax title status. And also in particular regarding Newtonville Ave, I guess we're owed in taxes now $670,000, and we are out close to, I think, $400,000 on the demolition costs. So unless we sell that property for, basically $1 million or more, we're net negative on that. So how do we avoid something like that in the future? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Lemieux, why don't I come back to you and then over to Treasurer Mendez.
Thank you very much. So we have, certainly, obviously, Newtonville Ave is a big issue, but we've really combed through all of the properties that are in tax title. Anyone who has not paid taxes through fiscal 20, it's a 2-year period before properties go into tax title, which of course Mr. Mendez will explain all of it for you in a minute. But so any property that's in tax title, it's since fiscal 20 that they have not paid taxes. Fiscals 21 and 22, they have not landed in tax title yet. The good news is there are only 79 properties in the city that are in tax title, which we have well over 28,000 properties in this city. And so that is 0.3% of all of the properties in this city are in tax title. That's an incredibly low number, and clearly is one of the absolute strengths of this city. We've taken those 79 properties and we've sliced and diced the information a few different ways. We've looked at, do we want to sort it by what percentage of the value, the assessed value does a property owner owe to us. We've looked at different dollar amounts to try to figure out, what do we really concentrate on first, and what do we bring to you as the properties that we think are where we ought to be really starting this process and our policies and procedures and whatever it is that they end up being. What was most important. What we have that we will, I believe Mr. Mendez will put up on the screen for you tonight, and I don't know if we've actually sent it to you all yet or not, but we certainly will by the end of the evening. What we've done is taken these 79 properties, we've culled out, there are actually 44 properties that owe us more than $50,000. That represents 85% of the principal that we are owed, and a much higher percentage of the interest that we are owed. We charge people, they have to pay 14% interest when they are delinquent with their taxes. And so the interest builds up very, very quickly, as we also Newtonville Ave. So without me belaboring the point, I just wanted you to know we've gone through, Ron has certainly identified on a lot of these properties, whether or not they are inhabited, whether or not they're developable or undevelopable, and kind of where we are with all of them. So we were really thinking that tonight it would be best for us to focus on these 44 properties, every one of them owing us more than $50,000. And as I said, that's well over 85% of what's owed to the city by delinquent properties. And so with that, Madam Chair, I'm happy to turn it over to Mr. Mendez.
Let me just pause for a minute because I see that Councillor Oliver's hand is up. I just want to check and see if he wants to add something prior to Mr. Mendez speaking or after. Councillor Oliver?
After, by all means. My apologies.
Okay.
I'll take the hand down.
No, that's
Thank
fine. You can leave it. You can leave it up so I don't forget. Let's just
Sorry.
turn to
Okay.
Mr. Mendez. Okay, go, Mr. Mendez. Thank you very much.
Unmute, so you should be able to hear me now at this point. So you should see the list of 44 properties that Ms. Lemieux referenced. And at the bottom is are the totals of the properties that owe more than $50,000. That's roughly 3.7 million in principal, in total 7.1 million. It's almost 85% of what is owed to us in tax title are just these 44 particular properties. And a couple of the things that we've looked at just to sort of see how we categorize them. I hope you're seeing the list. So you are? Okay, good. So you see 91 Newtonville Ave at the top here. And that property, of course, was demolished because it was a clear and present danger as determined by inspectional services. And that property we have it booked as an assessed value of $610,000. But in speaking with Mr. Shaughnessy, the assessor, that is basically the value of the property that it's there. It's essentially the, for lack of a better term, it's a hole in the ground right now. So, but in further speaking with Mr. Shaughnessy, this property is actually zoned as a two-family. There was a two-family home there before. So this is a possibility of building a duplex there is the ultimate possibility. So there is a lot of opportunity, and in each unit, according to Mr. Shaughnessy, would sell for somewhere in the ballpark of $1.5 million. So, so there's a possibility of recouping our costs on this property. So that is some good news out of that property. But it is going to take some time because we have filed the foreclosure case. And if there are any questions, I'm happy to take them at any time. But we have filed the foreclosure case on that particular property, and we expect that foreclosure cases are difficult because they have to do a title search on the property first, and then the case has to go through its process. They have to look for heirs. The owner is deceased at this time, so they have to search for the individual's heirs to notify them, to give them the right to either redeem the property out of tax title or allow the foreclosure to proceed. If they redeem it out of tax title, at this point, they would need to reimburse us for the demolition costs as well as all the taxes outstanding. And then and then they would get the property back. Otherwise, it would proceed to foreclosure. Do you want me to pause now, Councilor Grossman? I see there's some hands up. I don't know.
Why don't I just inquire of those who have their hands up, because obviously this particular property is of great interest.
Madam Chair,
Yes, Councilor Gentile.
can I ask the treasurer if he could just answer my original question? I really want to understand, are there any state laws or City of Newton ordinances, or even guidance from the DOR or something that tells us when we should file tax liens, when we should foreclose? Or is this all, you know, the cities and towns, it's up to their discretion? I really want to know if there's any rules that document what needs to be done and when.
Mr. Mendez, you want to answer that first,
Yeah,
and
I'd
I'll
be happy
check
to
in and
jump
see
in
if
and
other
answer this
questions
question.
pertain to this
So-
property.
Sure. So every year, I'll just explain a little bit about the sort of how property taxes flow through the timeline. So every year at the beginning of the fiscal year, a lien, a tax lien arises automatically on every single taxable parcel in every city and town in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And that lien that exists by operation of law is intended to guarantee collection of the property taxes that are assessed on that property. So every property, mine, yours, everybody's, has that lien at the beginning of every fiscal year. 3 years and 6 months from the end of the fiscal year. So every fiscal year ends on June 30th. So 3 years and 6 months after the end of every fiscal year, that lien expires. That lien that exists by operation of law expires. And what my role as the tax collector is to ensure that we replace that lien with what's called a tax title or a tax taking on or before that expiration of that municipal lien. So by the end of this year, just to use this year as an example, this year we're in 2023. So at the end of 2023, December 31st of 2023, 3 years and 6 months from the end of, so if you count back 3 years, that takes us back to, so 6 months from that is June 30th of 23. So 22, 21, 20. So June 30th of 2020. So the fiscal year 20 taxes, the municipal lien that was guaranteeing payment of that expires at the end of this calendar year. So by that time, we need to have those properties in tax title to guarantee collection of the tax. Now, our plan is always to make sure we have them in tax title much sooner than that. Our timeline is that we don't wait, but we send out notices after the May 1st deadline. So every property gets billed quarterly, and the final and fourth quarter of every fiscal year is due May 1st. So right after May 1st, we start sending out to remind them that they owe money, and then we work with taxpayers over the ensuing year or so, year and several months, in order to get to a point where we either have received payment of the tax, or we've narrowed the list of taxes that have delinquent taxes down to a small enough list where we can conduct these tax title takings on them. And these tax title takings are a legal process that involves a legal notice that goes in the newspaper, and they also involve recording a document at the Registry of Deeds that formally puts on permanent public record a lien on the person's property. So so our goal is always by April 1st of every year, we're looking at doing these tax title takings on the fiscal year that is 2 years before April 1st. So this coming April 1st, which is coming up in a month, 2 months, whatever April 1st is, a month or so. Our plan is to have fiscal year 21's taxes in tax title by the end of March, by April 1st. And just to give you some context, we right now have 49 properties that are not on this list here that you see in front of us. They're not in tax title yet, but they still owe for fiscal year 21. So we're going to be sending out a couple of more notices to those individuals. Several of them will pay. We'll have people coming in and pay. We have people paying us at least once or twice a week. Some of these people come in and pay. And then we'll narrow the list down. When we did the fiscal year 20 taxes a year ago, there were about 30 that ended up going in tax title. So this list, you know, it's 79 now. In about a month, it's going to go up by, I'm going to guess, around 30. And then we'll gradually have people pay and it'll come back down. So it's always kind of in flux. I hope that answers your question, Councilor Gentile.
It does. Just one additional question and I'll be quiet. So
Sure.
I was unaware of this 3 years, 6 months, so that's helpful information to have. So my question is, what safeguards are in place that a property, you know, doesn't fall through the cracks?
Okay. You mean for the tax title process?
Yes, it sounds like you're, and it seems wise to me that you're not waiting the 3 years and 6 months for the original lien to expire. You're starting the process like 2 years in, which I think is good policy. But how do you know that any and all that you're catching any and all properties that are in arrears, whether it be 2 years, 3 years, or whatever?
Yeah, when we do the tax title takings and when we send out all these reminder notices, the same notice and the same process applies to everybody who owes money. So we run lists out of our accounts receivable software, and we download, you know, into our notices that go out and into our tax taking process every single property that owes money for that fiscal year.
So you're confident that your software, that you can push a button, whatever, and it will bring up any and all properties that are behind in their taxes?
Yes, and then as a backstop, we further reconcile all of our receivables with Mr. Curley's records. So the comptroller's office also keeps a control of our receivables as well, and we're required to reconcile our receivables with his control numbers on the general ledger. So not only are we confident that we're downloading all of the data out of the system, but we also reconcile with Mr. Curley's control records on the general ledger to ensure that we've captured everything. So as we stand here today, the only taxes that are outstanding for real estate are fiscal 21, fiscal 22, and of course, we're in the middle of fiscal year 23. So those are the only years with outstanding taxes that have not been put into tax title. Everybody who owes from prior to fiscal year 21 is on this list, consists of these 79 people.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, let me check in with other folks who have their hands up, because we've got quite a few now before we continue marching down the list, if indeed that's what everybody wants to do. Councillor Oliver, you're first.
Yeah, I know, I appreciate that. Thank you, Madam Chair. So this is really interesting to me. I actually have a parallel item that's docketed to hit next week in committee. And I'm really curious, is there, similar to Councilor Gentile's example a minute ago, you know, if we can push of a button, make sure that we're seeing the properties kind of added to this list, is there another button to add a column to this that would state how long some of these properties have been pending with their tax payments? Like, can that be added to this? Because I am very curious to know, like, how long these properties have been on the list.
Yeah, I think there was a list that went out to everybody that was sort of another version of this same data that had how far back the fiscal years went. So Newtonville 91 Newtonville Ave, for example, went back to 1994. So some of these go back a number of years.
Interesting. My fault. Did that hit the packet and I missed it? Or was that sent around by email?
I
apologize.
I asked that it be resent out today. I'm not sure, I believe it went out. And Ron's correct. It's got, you know, it tells you exactly when it first went into tax title. Did that go out, Tom?
Yes, it did. I sent it out to the city council.
Okay. So you have it, John.
All right, my fault entirely on that one. Yep, I see it right there. Sorry, got it. And just out of curiosity, when a property, you know, goes through the tax and title process, and there is, you know, I'm going to use a layman's term here, like a permanent lien on the property.
Mhm.
Does that effectively mean that when that property exchanges hands, that lien is paid off before the owner is, you know, receives whatever, you know, check on their own? Is that correct?
Yes, actually, we actually receive requests from closing attorneys that handle these transactions. We receive those requests every day for what's called a municipal lien certificate. And that municipal lien certificate that we issue lists everything that's outstanding on the property. So it lists everything, including the current fiscal year. So it tells them how much the taxes are because they need to apportion the current quarter between the buyer and the seller. And it also lets the closing attorney know if there are any prior taxes, water and sewer bill payments, or anything else that constitutes a lien on the property from the city. And then we typically receive at the closing, we will get a check from the attorney's office covering the total balance that's outstanding as of the date of the closing. We'll actually be requested to provide an exact payoff on the closing. And then we get all that money back, and that clears our lien, and that ensures that the buyer who's buying the property is not buying a property that's encumbered by a lien. Because if in the event a buyer did take title to the property, and I have in my experience, not in Newton but in other communities, have had situations where people exchange deeds and there wasn't an attorney involved, the buyers sometimes were surprised to find that they now owe the taxes from the prior owner because the lien follows the property. So there is a built-in incentive to buyers to make sure that that we get paid in full.
That's interesting. And are there ever, there's a funny word. How often does it happen when the city's municipal lien is in excess of the what's the word I'm missing right now?
Value of the property.
Either in excess of the value of the property or the owner's equity in the property. In other words, there's not a whole lot of juice there to work with.
Yeah, I mean, the equity in the property, that's obviously going to depend on how much the mortgage is that they have on the property.
Right.
But for these properties that are in tax title, the concern here is that not only are we adding another year's tax every year to the balance, we're also accumulating interest, and the interest rate is 16% on these tax title accounts. So these balances can start to snowball after a number of years. And it obviously takes a long time. I mean, you see 91 Newtonville Ave, before the property was demolished, I believe we had it valued at somewhere around $900,000. I don't remember the exact number, but I don't think it quite topped $1 million yet. But and we were at 670, and that's after, I think that was in tax title for 30 years. So so it does take time for it to exceed the value of the property. Again, the equity in the property, obviously this property doesn't have a mortgage on it, but if it did, it would just be whatever the mortgage is. Our lien is obviously superior to the mortgage. So if for some reason there's a mortgage foreclosure, the mortgage company would pay us as well out of their closing.
Interesting.
I hope that answers your question.
It does, yeah. And I have another question on the tip of my tongue. I think it's different than the question posed earlier by Councilor Gentile.
Go for it.
Is there, thank you. Is there a process or a legal process by which the city could say, look, after you're not paying taxes for 5 years, we want it all back and we want it now. Get out.
Yeah, it's a matter of policy. All these tax collection processes are governed by Mass General laws. I think there's a sort of an overriding policy that they should be uniform in every city and town across the state. So they do govern them. They're governed by local officials, but using state law. So we do have the ability to exercise, I'll use the term prosecutorial discretion. We can decide after the property is in tax title we can decide whether or not it makes sense from the city's perspective to foreclose on a property, given the fact that if the city were to foreclose on the property, the city becomes the owner of the property. And, just as an example, and this isn't an example present on any of these properties that I'm aware of, but if there were hypothetically environmental issues on the property, the city may not want to foreclose on the property for taxes, even if it's owed, for those reasons. So there could be a number of reasons why a city may or may not foreclose. So it's really up to the policy discretion of local officials, of the treasurer, the mayor, to make those judgment calls as to whether or not it makes sense in each particular case, to look at these cases on a case-by-case basis. Unlike the tax taking process, where we're just doing everybody, where you're doing the entire list, no matter what's going on with the property, we're putting a lien on it. But when you're actually doing the foreclosure and the city's going to become the owner, we have that ability to exercise that discretion on a case-by-case basis.
All right, no, I appreciate that. That's a great answer. And I just want to make sure for the record, people don't misconstrue my question as my support for kicking people out. I just want to understand where the boundaries are. But I do appreciate it. Thanks so much. That's it for me for now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Califf.
Yeah, so my questions, some of them were answered there, but Mr. Mendez, so there's no process really to just kind of call the question with these homeowners to pay. So historically, do these just go? How long do they last? I mean, I know it's a matter of each one individually, but are they on the books like this in tax title for years and years?
Yes, the lien will actually last forever. Just as an example, we often receive requests from attorneys who will see these tax title takings that were done. I recently had one that was done, I believe it was in 1923. There was a tax title taking done in the city of Newton, and I had to release it because the closing attorney that was doing a title search couldn't find the release of that tax title taking, so I had to do a release. And we were not owed money going back to 1923, thank goodness. But no, they do really stay forever, and they become an encumbrance on people's property for all time
Until they're paid.
until we release it, or until we foreclose.
Okay, and then is that why there's so few notes in the right column? Because it doesn't really matter. I mean, it's just.
The notes were really just my, sort of I've been working with both ISD and with HHS to reach out to homeowners, and also just to wrap my own head around, which ones to prioritize first. The ones that don't have any notes are just simply property owners that I know these are properties that I'm pretty confident are owner occupied, either single families or condo units. And the other ones are the ones that I'm really thinking of as more priorities, just because they're, if a property is abandoned or dilapidated, or if it's a commercial property, or, there could be any other reason why the city might want to acquire that property. Those we might want to, if we have to decide which ones we're doing this year versus, next year, those are properties we might want to consider first. And I also just wanted to make notes for myself. Some of these are under contract. Number 36, as an example, is one that I just received a request for a municipal lien certificate last week. And so I expect that one's going to close within a month or so, assuming all goes as planned. And I do know that there's another property that has a special permit pending. So those are just notes I make for myself, just so that I keep track of the status of all these different properties.
Okay, thank you. And then this question is from Ms. Lemieux. How is this money accounted for in the budget? I would assume we're not spending against it, but how is it? Just when it comes in, you just never know, so you can't really plan for it, and it's just additional revenue? Or how do you plan for it?
It would, did I unmute?
You're
it
on,
would,
yeah.
You
it would
did.
really just be additional revenue. I mean, we assume, we are very, very fortunate. We actually assume 100% collection of the revenue that would be owed in any given year. Some years we collect more than 100% because we may have people who are not paying their current year tax that particular year. But as Ron was saying, there's, you know, other properties who may be paying up for taxes owed for several years. So some years we collect more than 100%. Some years we end up at 99.8. But the city of Newton, the tax collection rate is incredibly high.
Okay, thank you. I'm good.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Kalis. Next, we have Councillor Laredo.
Oh, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for the presentation, the information. Very interesting. So I want to just make sure I understand a couple of things. Mr. Mendez, tax lien comes ahead of any mortgage, is that right? So it's the first priority?
That is correct. The only liens that could possibly be ahead of us would be the IRS, if they owe the IRS any money, and possibly the Massachusetts Department of Revenue.
All right. I will say this, you know, folks who are significantly behind on their real estate taxes may also have really big obligations to the IRS. So I think that's something we ought to be cautious about. Second, as I understand it, if we do a tax foreclosure, we go through the legal process and the city then takes title to the real estate, and the city in turn can sell it at auction or use it for itself. Is that accurate as well?
That is correct.
Okay. So a couple observations here. First of all, it's great that we only have 79 or so properties in tax title status. I'd be interested, not for tonight, to understand how many of our residents and businesses are behind in their taxes, not to the point where they're 3 years behind, but a year or 2 years behind. I think that's something we ought to look at. Second, on a going forward basis, I really think we ought to have two sets of criteria as to how aggressively we pursue something, one for a residential and the other for a commercial slash, and by commercial, I'm going to include apartment building that's owned by a landlord who effectively is in business. I took a quick look at 967 Washington Street. I remember that's where we spent a lot of time doing a special permit. Personally, I would not vote for any special permit again if I knew that the owner owed us money. I think that is foolish on our part, and we ought to be making sure we collect. The other concern I have, in addition to the commercial, separating out the commercial from the residential, is I think we need to be very careful about how far behind we let folks get. I mean, the extreme is 91 Newtonville Avenue, where we are going to lose money. If we do take title, we're going to lose money. We're not going to get everything we're owed. But there's others where the value is now, 56, 40, 39%. And that's problematic because, as I said, I think those folks could very well have tax liens that would come ahead of us too. And if we take the property, there's no guarantee that we're going to get the assessed value for something that's really run down. So I do think we need to be more aggressive here. And then the final consideration is when we let a property get so far behind that it's abandoned or dilapidated, you've made a few notes to that. That's not just a city problem, it's also a neighborhood problem. So I would suggest coming up with a set of rules that guide you, again, distinguishing between commercial / landlord situations and residential, and having something where you're at above a certain percentage, 20 or 25%. I don't think you want to go too far. We're taking title. And I don't think that's going to harm an individual who may be elderly and way behind in their taxes are probably not going to have any obligation to the government. And likely, if and when they pass or the property's transferred, we'll get our money. But I would be concerned otherwise. So I'll leave my thoughts there. And as Councilor Gentile said, I view this as a beginning to how we can continue to improve. And I use that word deliberately because we're doing well here. It's just a matter of always trying to do a little bit better. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Malachy.
Thank you. I just wanted to understand better the difference between how we recover our money before things go into tax title as opposed to after. So you just described after we're in line ahead of the banks, but behind the IRS and probably behind Mass DOR.
Mhm. Yes.
And then if it hasn't gotten to the stage where they're in tax title, but they still owe back taxes, is it just happening through that process where when the transaction occurs, the attorneys are getting their municipal lien certificate and we're getting our money through that process?
Yes, that if there were other liens owed to the IRS or to the Mass Department of Revenue or any other creditor, then if they were, in order to be able to sell the property, the seller, the person who owns the property, is going to have enough value there to pay off their mortgage, pay off us, pay off anybody else they owe, the IRS. Otherwise, they won't be able to sell the property because a buyer it would be inadvisable for a buyer to take ownership of the property and inherit a bunch of liens from the prior owner. So that then almost precludes them from being able to sell the property at that point. So then if they can't sell the property, somebody has to foreclose at that point. And it could be us, it could be the IRS, it could be the bank if there's a mortgage, but it could be anybody. But as far as before the tax title is done, that municipal lien process is very effective. It is, those certificates are requested frequently, and I want to say almost weekly. Certainly, when the real estate market was really hopping last year and the year before, we were getting multiple payoffs, and it actually brought the list down. Our list right now for fiscal year 21, I mentioned fiscal 21, we only have 49 parcels in that list. And we have, for fiscal 22, we have 263 at this point. So, and that's fiscal 22 ended obviously last June 30th. And they've been receiving multiple reminder notices. And the 263 is pretty typical. It's a very small percentage. It's obviously more than 79, but we still got another year of sending out notices and working with people and people, buying and selling to resolve many of those properties. But a year from now, we'll be looking at fiscal 22 and with a little bit more of precision.
Have there ever been times when, because the mortgage was so high or they owed somebody else ahead of us, that we did not get our tax money when a property changed hands?
That would rarely happen. The only circumstance that I can think of where that would happen would be if the property owner filed for bankruptcy protection. If the property owner files for bankruptcy protection, then the bankruptcy court ends up selling the property, which could happen. That would be a circumstance where the bankruptcy court would then sell the property and pay everybody according to that pecking order, so to speak. And then we would get, we would be after the IRS and the DOR in all likelihood.
And after the bank?
No, actually, we're before the bank.
I'm sorry, we would still be before the bank.
Yeah, we're always before the bank. So it's only the IRS, only the federal government and the state government that's above us. And any other lien that's on the property, whether it's the bank's mortgage or a second mortgage, or if they have a delinquent credit card or anything like that, that might be on the property, that would get paid after us if there's any money left over.
And even though it would be bankruptcy court, it would go in the pecking order. It wouldn't be like everybody gets 80 cents on the dollar or whatever.
Not for secured liens, the 80 cents on the dollar, that would be unsecured, debt. So for example, if somebody owed us real estate taxes and they owed us motor vehicle excise taxes, we would file a proof of claim with the bankruptcy court for everything. And then we would get all of our real estate taxes. And then if the dividend being paid to unsecured creditors was 20%, then we would get 20% of what we're owed on excise taxes, as an example.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Counselor Gentile.
So just a couple of quick points and then a suggestion, and then if it's okay, I don't see any hands, I was gonna move whole. So first of all, a couple quick points to Councilor Kalis's question about how long some of these places have been on tax lien. If you look at that list, there's like 8 or 9. The first 8 or 9 have been around for like 20 years. To me, that's just too long. And I would think that we would want to take some action. As far as a special permit, we, at the very least, on the Washington Street property, there should have been a condition of the special permit approval that made it clear that a building permit would not be issued until the delinquent taxes were paid in full. I'm not criticizing land use because they didn't know about it. So I know that planning, has a checklist of things that need to be taken care of when somebody comes in for a special permit. I would suggest that they add to that list a search of the property to see if there are any back taxes owed, and they should add that. And that's something that can be done tomorrow by the administration. We could be assured of that. And I think that it would take care of that going forward, because I don't think, any counselors want to be approving special permits where the property owner, owes money and back taxes. And I think we got to close that loophole. And then the final thing I wanted to suggest is I would like to get with Mr. Mendez and some of the other docketers and come up with some specific recommendations to come back to finance with as to how we might tighten up the process a little bit more. I fully expected, knowing Maureen, that she would point out that percentage-wise, Newton's doing a very good job, and she's correct. But there are things that, as Councilor Laredo said, that we can do a little bit better. I don't think any property should be sitting on a list, for, 10, 15, 20 years. I think we can do a better job of incentivizing people to pay. And one of the ways that you do that is by initiating foreclosure. That doesn't mean you ever get to foreclosure and take over a property that you don't want for environmental reasons. But if you make it clear to people that you're serious about collecting these back taxes, I think you'll have an even better collection rate. And again, we do a good job. So I would like to get with Ron and others and come back to finance with some specific suggestions that we can discuss and see if we want to either put something in an ordinance or just have some policies that we can agree to and go from there. And so at this, and I'll move hold.
Okay. So we have a motion for hold from Counselor Gentile, Counselor Laredo, then Maliki.
I'm not on the committee, so that's fine with me. Counselor Gentile, I'll be happy to work with you and Mr. Mendez offline whenever you want.
Counselor Maliki.
Yeah, I'll say same here. Oops, sorry. Yes. I was just wondering, since Councilor Gentile had asked about state programs, and Mr. Mendez, could you just talk a little bit about, you had mentioned the Attorney General's Distressed Property Receivership Program that seemed to have been something we might have been able to use for Newtonville Lab, but we weren't able to, I guess. And
yes,
what's the way to qualify for that?
Sure. The Attorney General's office has a program where they will take what they call receivership of distressed properties and they essentially take over the property, they rehab it, they sell it, and then they send the money back to the owner that if there's anything left over after they rehab it, they would pay the dividend back to the owner, and then the property gets sold. So it's a way of preventing these abandoned properties from kind of just sitting there forever. The problem with the Newtonville Ave property is just the sheer cost of demolition. There were a lot of significant issues that Mr. Lojak probably could expound upon at some point that with that property that were unique to that property. So, and you can see from the demolition costs, they were on the very high side. So that was a unique property in and of itself. Some of the other properties that are abandoned or dilapidated are something that we may look into the Attorney General's program for to see if that's an option. I know when in the prior town that I was in, we actually successfully used that program, and it actually is a good way of keeping properties that are in these kinds of sort of states of limbo, so to speak, of getting them back into being a productive, good part of the neighborhood, and taxes are paid on time and that kind of thing. So that is good. So there is one other thing I did want to mention on the special permits. I forgot to mention it earlier, but I did have a meeting with the planning department last week and the law department. So Treasury is now going to be part of the approval process or the application process in the new online permitting system. So we will get notified going forward anytime there is a special permit that's being pulled, or a building permit, or any other permit, so that we have the ability. We don't have the ability to stop the permit, but the city council did enact an ordinance that allows the permit granting authority to stop a permit or a license from being granted if taxes are owed. But we can at least provide the information to the permit granting authority. So that's something that is in the system that's in the works right now. So we are moving in that direction.
Councilor Maliki, did you have more?
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So we have a motion for hold. Mr. Mendez, I had two clarifying questions. You mentioned the 16% interest rate. That's mandated by law?
Yes, that's mandated by statute.
Okay. Just so I understand, obviously there was a lot of discussion around when we take title and at what point in time. Do you have a sense, how often have we done it in history?
I did do some research. The last time I saw foreclosures that were recorded by the city of Newton was in the early 1990s. So at some point in the early to mid 1990s, it appears that there was a policy change, and that just sort of remained the same until now.
Okay. Well, I will await more from my colleagues and the work that they're going to do with you offline, but this was a really interesting conversation. I really appreciate all of the preparation and information that you put into providing this document and the accompanying information. So we have a motion to hold from Councilor Gentile. Is there any other discussion, comments, questions from anybody before we vote on that? Okay, seeing none. All those in favor of hold, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, we have 8-0 to hold, and that is our business for the evening. So thank you all and enjoy the rest of your night. Appreciate everybody's attendance, questions, and discussion.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.